June 4, 1926. The Granby Leader Male, Granby, Quebec, Canada. Plot to murder Indians. What is believed to be a horrible conspiracy on the part of some prominent white men in Oklahoma to possess themselves of the property of wealthy Osage Indians by the simple process of murdering the Indians has been halted, if not thoroughly exposed, by an investigation undertaken by state and federal authorities, says the Mail and Empire of Toronto. One result of that investigation is that W.K. Hale, called the King of the Osage Hills and one of the most prominent white men in the state, is under arrest, awaiting trial for murder. Another well-known white is John T. Ramsey, a farmer. Hale's nephew, Burkhart, is also implicated. He is a husband of one of the rich Brown family, Osage Indians who were made fabulously wealthy by the oil discoveries on the reservation. Since 1912, when the oil gushers were found, hundreds of whites have married into the Osage tribe for the cold-blooded purpose of getting hold of the Indians' property. Many of them have succeeded, but a law of last year put an end to that kind of profiteering, for it prevents whites inheriting from Indians. The government has also put an end to the scandal of white men getting themselves appointed the legal guardians of Indians. Thus fortified, they had a free hand in disposing of the Indians' incomes. Of the 100 of Indians who were defrauded by this tutelage, only a half-dozen feeble-minded persons are now supervised. How many people were killed in the plot now being untangled is not known. Some say a score. 9 murders in the last 4 years are known to have had a bearing upon the plot of white men to get hold of the property of the Osages. In 1922, the body of Anna Brown, a wealthy Indian woman, was found in a secluded canyon with a bullet hole in the head. Not much attention was paid to the death, since the whites do not value the Indians as much as they value themselves. It was supposed that Anna had become involved in a brawl or a feud and had been, naturally, done in. A few weeks later, her cousin Henry Roan was killed. Then it was recalled that Lizzie Q. Brown, who had held the original estate of Anna, had also died mysteriously. The 3 deaths in one family in a short time naturally attracted attention. Nor were the killings at an end. Again and again, Indian men and women were found done to death with no clue as to the slayer. It was noted that while some of the deaths had the appearance of accidents, perhaps a prearranged appearance, the death had, invariably, been sudden. Suspicion turned to a well-known character named Bert Lawson. Public opinion held that he was the sort of desperado who would be likely to murder Indians for a small sum, but Lawson had a perfect alibi. Investigation showed that he was in jail at the time of any killing with which it was tried to connect him. The murders continued. Charles Whitehorn, a relative of Anna Brown, was slain on the outskirts of Pawhuska, which is in the heart of the Osage country. 2 months later, George Bighart, son of the last hereditary chief of the tribe, was taken ill and removed to a hospital in Oklahoma City. He was accompanied by W.K. Hale and Ernest Burkhart, Hale's nephew, who had married a sister of Anna Brown. In the hospital, Charles Vaughn, Bighart's attorney, consulted him. Next day, Bighart died, and the following day, the body of Vaughn was found on a railroad right-of-way between Pawhuska and Oklahoma City. A coroner's jury decided that he had either fallen from a train or been murdered. By this time, the people in the district were in a state of panic, and then, in May 1923, occurred the crime that caused the authorities to take vigorous action and begin the investigation that has led to the arrests. The house of W.E. Smith, who had married a wealthy Osage woman, was destroyed by dynamite, and Smith, his wife, and a servant girl were killed. Once more, Lawson was suspected, but again, his old alibi served him. It did not wholly satisfy one of the sleuths, and he took Lawson in hand and talked to him almost a whole night. Out of this interview came the first real clue. Lawson made a confession. He said that he had been in jail, but that when he was needed to commit a murder, he was released by his warder, went out, killed the man or the woman, and returned to his cell. This confession was used to force other confessions, and these confessions led to the arrests. Shortly after Hale was brought before the grand jury, it was learned that he is suing the Capital Life Insurance Company of Denver for $25,000, he being a beneficiary for that amount under an agreement with Harry Rohn, who was murdered in 1923. The company refused to pay, and Hale has appealed to the law. It is said that only 200 full-blooded Osage Indians survive, although, on the rolls of the Indian agent at Pawhuska, there are 2,200 estates inherited by descendants who have married into other races. The Indians were made rich, as stated, by the unexpected discovery of oil upon the lands the government had given them. Needless to say, the discovery was a great surprise to the government, which had sought to establish its wards upon lands that would be despised by the whites. The Indians owned the wells and the money accruing from them. As they died off, the wealth of the survivors increased, for the land was owned in common. At first, the government handed over their royalties in lump sums, but the Osages were unable to keep their hands on it after they had bought the inevitable motorcars. White sharpers of both sexes flocked to the scene and grew fat. October 30, 1926, Sarasota Herald Tribune, Sarasota, Florida. King of Osages is convicted of Indian murders. William K. Hale, known as King of the Osage Hills, and John Ramsey, cowboy farmer, convicted of murdering Henry Rohn, an Indian, that Hale might collect insurance of $25,000. Case nationally famous. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, October 29, AP. After months of work, in which thousands of dollars was spent, the government today convicted William K. Hale, northern Oklahoma cattleman, an alleged leader of a murder conspiracy that struck terror into the Osage Indian tribe several years ago. Hale, known as the King of the Osage Hills, and John Ramsey, a cowboy farmer, were found guilty by a jury in federal court on a charge of slaying Henry Rohn, an Osage, who was shot to death. The government charged so that Hale could collect $25,000 insurance, which he carried on the Indian's life. The jury imposed life sentences. Nearly a score of persons met violent deaths in the Osage country within the space of 2 years. As death followed death, the Osages, the richest Aboriginal people in the world, became terrorized. Some strung electric lights about their homes at night for protection. The Osage country, a region of oil derricks and ranches and wild hills that have harbored the most desperate outlaws in the Southwest, knew the feeling of deadly fear. Investigations were started, but they came to naught. Persons believed to have knowledge of the mysterious killings were found dead, one in what was made to appear a train accident. The government stepped in to protect its Indian wards. Department of Justice agents filtered into the Osage country. For months they worked, apparently without progress. They entered penitentiaries in the Southwest to question convicts who had had dealings with Hale. Then came the arrest of the cattle baron, his nephew Ernest Burkhart, and Ramsey. The state also had been busy, the Attorney General having thrown his forces into the case. Before being taken over by federal authorities, Hale and Ramsey were held on a state charge of murder in connection with the death of W.E. Smith, who, with his Indian wife and a servant girl, was killed in an explosion which demolished the Smith home. Smith's Indian wife was a member of a wealthy Osage family, which, it was charged, Hale plotted to wipe out in order to come into their wealth. Ernest Burkhart pleaded guilty to a murder charge in connection with the dynamiting of the Smith home and named his uncle, Hale, as the instigator of the plot. Burkhart is now serving a life sentence in the Oklahoma Penitentiary. The government claimed jurisdiction in the Roan case on the ground that he was slain on Indian property. At the first trial of Hale and Ramsey, several months ago, the jury disagreed. Ramsey, in a confession obtained by Department of Justice agents, said he lured Roan to a pasture and shot him to death at the behest of Hale, who was to pay him $500 and give him an automobile. At the trial, Ramsey repudiated confession, declaring it had been taken under duress, which government agents denied. Witnesses at the first trial were afraid to talk, but their stories were gradually unfolded as they gained confidence. The government's victory came after nearly a year of bitter legal battle. Hale's formidable array of counsel contested every step, and one phase, the jurisdiction of the government, was brought to the United States Supreme Court when District Judge John H. Cotterill held against the prosecution. Hale's attorney announced intention of appealing the verdict to the Circuit Court of Appeals. Both defendants received the verdict calmly today.